Okay, organization and org chart. Why have roles and responsibilities? Why can't we all just sort of dynamically assign stuff? Well, because stuff will fall in the cracks. Some of you already mentioned that to some of your projects where you have either two people working at cross purposes on the same thing, or you sometimes find that nobody at all was working on something that's important. One of the complaints that I have at the end of semesters of this class is often there were team members who just didn't do anything. Who didn't carry their weight, who didn't produce what they were supposed to produce in a timely fashion, and so on. As I mentioned the first day of class, if I get those sort of complaints at the end of the semester, I reserve the right to adjust your grade downward. So, participate, be visible. Now, what you don't want is to waste time coming. Now, I will say up front, you should seriously consider doing a couple of different reorganizations through the course of the project. In other words, whatever org chart you come up with at the start may not be the org chart you want 4 weeks into this or 8 weeks into it. But you do want to be clear as to who has responsibility, what their tasks are, and how to get work done in the time you have. Now the problem is that there is often more prestige associated with certain roles. This is something Brooks talks about. Let's see, who gets to be chief architect? Or as someone has said years ago, the way you conjugate the verb to program is I architect, you code, he, she, or it tests. And that's pretty much sort of the prestige you find out there. I object to that. Particularly the disdain for quality engineers, because they're the ones who ultimately save your butts in trying to get a product out the door. But it's hard because not only is it a problem among a lot of software engineers that they tend to look down on quality engineers, but frankly managers tend to look down on quality engineers. And then they wonder why their projects are late or never shipped. Yes?
Is that partially because it's common since the technical side stops at management, programmers move to management, that programmers are used to be, or managers are used to be programmers commonly?
Actually, no. In fact, one of the problems with, he asked is this because programmers often move up to management? Actually, one of the problems you will find is that management, top management organizations tend to all have business backgrounds. So they tend to view programmers with great suspicion. It's kind of like, you guys are all flaky and you're lying to me because you just want to goof around and play Fortnite on your work computers and then give us occasional updates of code. And managers don't understand software engineering. This is the problem we already talked about. It's and I've literally had this where, management says, can you put this feature in? And we say, oh yeah, and 3 days later the feature's up there working. And they come back and say, well, can you put this feature in? And we say, no, it can't. It's like, well, why not? You did this other one in like 3 days. It's like, yeah, but this is different. How is it different? Well, it's hard to explain, but it really is not easy. There's a level of technical misunderstanding, if not ignorance, often in top management that makes them view us with great suspicion because they can't predict what we're going to say when they ask us to do something. Either we impress the heck out of them, or it's what we've already talked about. It's like, well, here's a program we want, and we huddle as a team, and in 2 weeks we got this wonderful mocked-up user interface. It's got menus and windows and icons, and it looks really slick. And they're like, golly, you're almost done. It's like, no, it's going to take another year. It's like, why is it going to take a year? I can see everything there. You've got the whole user. Well, but that doesn't do the back end. It's like, well, why not? It's kind of like, erecting a large plywood facade of a building, and they want to move in. Yes?
A few years ago, I read an article that said if you really want to help your managers understand what you code, that you create the crappiest UI you can, and just each time you develop a feature, you update that feature on the UI.
There's a lot to be said for that. I actually, for many years, I wanted literally build a quarter scale PC, little tiny monitor, little tiny keyboard, little tiny box, and show any prototypes on that. And said it's going to take us 6 months to move it up to the full-size PC. Because if you go to a manager with a scale model of a new office building, they're not going to say, well, when can we move in? It's kind of like, oh, no, it's a scale model. You know, when are we going to break ground? But they see a prototype. I mean, I actually like your idea. That's actually more feasible in some ways. The problem is we like the low-hanging fruit. We like to produce stuff. And the problem we often run into is that we set expectations too high. And then we get to the reality of actual software development and getting all the hard, nitty-gritty, difficult stuff done. Management is less understanding, yeah.
I don't remember if it's from Mythical Man, but there was something that if people tend to avoid the hardest things first, but that's probably the
Well, that's one of my articles.
Okay.
That's do not defer the difficult in IT. That'll be in one of your readings, your future readings of Webster Readings. And yes, this is a very issue. We tend to push off all the hard problems. It's another reason for that 90-90 rule. We do all the low-hanging fruit, we do all the easy stuff, and we're pushing off all the really hard stuff. And then you get towards the end, and suddenly you've got half a dozen really hard problems. And sometimes you've coded yourself in directions that makes your solutions for them mutually compatible. You start unwinding and backing up. Yeah.
It was basically the same one. Do you think that, like, you know, part of the reason managers might get the wrong idea is that usually the first thing you show them is a bunch of work, but it was super easy work?
Oh yeah.
Versus the little work you have left that's really hard work.
Yeah, that's exactly the problem. So why have an organization chart? Division of labor, focus on talents and interests, make responsibility clear, establish lines of communications that reflect target architecture. Again, in Brooks, he talks about Conway's Law. The architecture of the system you build will inevitably reflect the organization of the team building. So what you want to do is figure out your architecture, then organize your team to do that architecture. This is why on that $500 million project that I reviewed, when I did my best to figure out what there was no chief architect for starters. When I did my best to figure out the architecture, this is what kept coming to mind. The old Windows. This is pretty much what their architecture looked like. It was just a mess. It was an absolute mess. And no one had responsibility. Let's see here. Come on. There you go. Align individual goals. One of the articles you'll read is how to retain IT talent with goal alignment. That was one of the things that helped us tremendously at Pages, and I've since seen other works that propose the same thing. Now, org charts don't have to be complex, and for most of you, we're looking at 3 to 8 people. So figure out what I want to see from org charts are reporting and communications lines. Now, admittedly, with a 3-person project, it's going to be pretty simple. Everyone's probably going to talk to everyone else. There is a reason why a lot of good, classic pieces of software were written by teams of 2 to 3 people. Because you have very high bandwidth communication. And it's very easy to sort of mind meld. But once you get beyond that, you start having to do explicit communication. Roles and titles. I want every project to have someone designated as project manager and every project to have someone else designated as chief architect. You know, use Thunderdome or whatever you want to do to figure out who gets to do what. These are some various other types. I'll have these slides posted too, so they'll be up there along with this. Along with your org chart, I want initial definitions of roles and responsibilities. In other words, for each person, what deliverables are they responsible for, who has final approval or decision. You're welcome to come up with funny titles if you want. There's a website called the Silicon Valley job title, and you can just keep clicking on this. And the sad thing is that you can find most of your, you know. Seriously, this is. You truly see this. The Valley is a different place. In-house game fire. Residents. Okay. Oops. You may have multiple roles. What I want is something that looks like this on your wiki page. Have an org chart, and I have this link in the slides, and then what those roles are and who's filling them, what they're responsible for. You may, and in fact you probably should, plan on updating that as you go along. So that's what your team has to do by Saturday midnight. Get this out on your wiki page. Have it visible. I will say this, I always say this, and I always have problems each semester. Any of your deliverables need to be easily accessed from your wiki page. I need, and Sean need both to be able to go to your wiki page and say, okay, there's your org chart and roles and responsibilities. There's your Bert and Gantt charts. There are your status reports. If, for proprietary reasons, you want to keep your source code proprietary, then you can have a private repository for that. And I really don't care. I'm not going to look at your source code. But all these deliverables that you actually have assignments for, you need to have visible. And frankly, all of you should feel free to look at each other's stuff for inspiration. Jerry Weinberg, one of I had the privilege of knowing, not terribly well, but I did know him. And I own probably at least somewhere between half a dozen and a dozen of his books. Has a book on becoming a technical leader. And one of the things he talks about, he says there's 3 things that we're trained from as young children to avoid. Error, theft, and calculation. He says, ironically, those are the 3 greatest sources of ideas. You make mistakes, you borrow from other people, or as Steve Jobs would say, good artists borrow, great artists steal. Or you combine existing ideas in new and unusual ways. So part of what really deems technical creativity is the willingness to make mistakes, to go down false alleys as per Armour, and maybe discover something new, to look at ideas and say, oh, I'm going to do that with this. I mean, what's a cliche about Hollywood movie pitches? Movie X with this. You know, Die Hard underwater. That's my movie pitch, okay? You want to be able to do the same thing with your software pitches. You should have a 1-sentence description of it, at most a 30-second description. If you want to sell your ideas, you have to be able to do a 30-second elevator pitch and get someone hooked and intrigued before you get from the 1st to the 3rd floor. Got all that. The challenges you're going to face, deciding how you're going to decide, competition for prestige jobs, available talents don't always match. You can read the slides. So these are the issues. This is probably one of the toughest things you're going to do as teams this week, especially for teams where there's more than 3 people, is decide who has what roles and what's the basis for it. As I said, recognize that you may early on have a certain organization and then rechange the organization. I would add, you don't necessarily, but you probably want to keep the same person as project manager and the other same person as chief architect through the whole thing. But if you get started and someone decides they want to do something different or they don't want to do the role they have, be flexible. Part of your goal is to help each other succeed as a team. all your grades for your deliverables are team grades. So, you should have this, your team's org chart, role responsibility information on your wiki by this Saturday at midnight. I'm going to, next week in class, I'll actually bring each of them up and have you do a 2 to 4 minute. Here's what we did, this is why we did it. Here were our trade-offs. Also, your first team status report, let me get through the status report. Here we go, let's do a few more innovations. Wearables architect. Wearables consultant. Custodian. That's almost blasé. Platform. Social media agitator. Okay. Let's see. Where's the other thing that you will do each week as a team is you will post on your wiki page a status report. This is something I introduced for the first time last semester, and it was absolutely wonderful. It gave me a very clear view into your projects. This is something that how many of you have worked on projects where your team has had to do actual status reports? Anyone? Okay, a few of you have. This is a very common real-world thing. As an expert witness, by the way, this is one of the things I really want to see. If I'm reviewing a project to try and decide how and when it failed, I want to see all the status reports in chronological order. And it's usually pretty easy for me to pick out where things started going wrong. One of the biggest symptoms is where the status report is just the same status report week after week after week. Not because no progress is being made, but because they don't want to report what's really going on. Yeah?
I haven't quite looked at it yet, but it's pretty self-explanatory how to actually get the file.
And we're gonna, yeah, there's a link on the class website. You download an Excel spreadsheet.
But to actually put it on the wiki page.
You can.
Put it like,
You can upload files. I'm pretty sure to your wiki page. Just put links to it. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Everyone has managed it so far. The main thing is that I need to be able to access, and Sean needs to be able to access all of your status reports. I had some teams last semester that had a single Google Doc that they would update, and it'd simply have a pointer to their current status report. What I want to see are links to each week's status report. Here's the form. It's just an Excel spreadsheet. I think the fields are fairly self-explanatory. What I don't want to see is the same status report just with the date changed, or as occasionally happens, the same status report with prior week's date. Whoever is doing this needs to think carefully about what they're putting here, actually update it. You can add things. I have teams that have greatly expanded the list of tasks and have kept track of them. You know, I want to see, this is your estimate. Now, we've mocked the percent complete, so you want to be real certain on what you can do here, but sort of here's the task, here's how far done it is, this is its current status, here's when we think we're going to finish. We should update those each week. This is your summary of the task, here's your project name, the date, who the project manager is, what tasks you have completed in the past week, what tasks you thought you were going to complete or for whatever reason had been delayed, and what's your work for the coming week. In other words, this should show the work that was done in the past week, this should show the work that you intend to do in the coming week. Risks or issues, and you can change all those to risks or all the issues of what you want. This is an important management aspect for software projects. You want to identify risks. It was very common, for example, in last semester, for people to say, we're not learning Unity as fast as we thought we could. This course is why I said, don't adopt unknown or new technologies. Now here, each week, each member of your team is responsible for reporting how many hours she or he put in on the project that week. My recommendation is that this cover Saturday through Friday. So you don't have, since you have to submit this Saturday night, have everyone give you their hours through end of day on Friday, so you're not trying to gather people and people are still coding at 11 o'clock on Saturday night saying, wait, I have these times. Was it that boring? Sorry. Anyway. So these are the reports. Now, this lecture will be online, the sheet's online, the slides are online. Here's a description of status report fields. Nothing terribly, complicated there. It's due every Saturday by midnight. Determine who's responsible. That's typically a project manager responsibility, but you can certainly delegate it. There's a recommendation you use billable hours on a Saturday through Friday basis. And post it on your team wiki so that we can look for it. I'm going to have Sean review all the status reports and compare week over week to see what has actually changed. Because that's what the value of a status report is. Craig, what did you actually accomplish in the past week? And that's it. So if I go back to, which one? There we go. I think this is one where oops. Sorry about that. And so what do you have this week? You need to create wiki org chart, a new page on your wikis with an org chart and roles and responsibilities. And your first team status report. You may not have a lot of hours. It used to be that the process here was everyone had to do 7 billable hours per week and everyone reported their billable hours separately. And that just doesn't actually fit within the way the projects go. You tend to have a natural rhythm as far as who does what and how many hours they have. But if I see a lot of status reports and key individuals are consistently reporting like 0, 1, 2 hours, that's a good flag to me as to how much you're actually contributing. You're watch one more podcast this week. If you missed the deadline on Saturday night, I actually extended the deadline till tonight. So if you missed watching your first podcast, you can still do it, still get full credit. And then by the start of next class period, read the rest of Mythical Man Month. And you actually have to go into the Learning Suite and mark off. That's when the deadline is. It's 1:59 p.m. next Monday. So finish Mythical Man Month and read Webster 2. Mark those both off in Learning Suite. If you fail to mark Webster 1 off today, let me know and I'll open it up for another day or so. Any other questions at this point? Yes?
So I heard that in previous classes there was a set amount of hours we had to do per week.
Yeah, it used to be that everyone reported their billable hours separately and it was always 7 hours. And I actually don't think that fits with the projects.
Okay.
So I expect you not to have a lot of hours like for this week. I mean, you're going to have some team discussions on roles and responsibilities. I assume you're going to start trying to figure out what you're going to do and come up to speed on technologies. So yes, you keep track of your hours, you report them, and that goes on your team status report. But I'm not requiring a fixed amount. The main thing is, if you're in the middle of the semester and you're still only working a couple hours a week, that's a big flag to me that you're not really doing anything with the project. Question in the back?
Kind of just attached to that, like, what is a good amount of time should we expect to be putting into this week?
Actually, I would actually say a good average is about 6 hours a week once you get into it. I've seen projects where I've had people put in 15 hours, in some cases 20 hours, because they were doing some real world coding and they were trying to get stuff done for their own deadlines and so on and so forth. But again, the two things to keep in mind is you have 2 demos. You have one 4 weeks before the end of the semester, and you have one the last class. So keep in mind as you're planning out your projects as a team, what it is you want to be able to demonstrate in March at that first demo. And then what more you want to have on April 15th, I think, is the last class, on that last demo. Any other questions? Yes?
Should the first demo be on a very small screen?
Works for me, but it'll have to go up here, so you know, it's going to be a big screen anyway. So, if no other questions, then class dismissed. I'll see you all next week.